Hey everyone, lots going on and it's just too much to blog about. So I thought what I'd do is I would start bringing in people who know more about this stuff than I do. Uh, I have a few other people in mind who I'll be contacting soon, but I'm very, very excited, first of all, to get Genevieve from Redux, who's been doing such amazing work on this for a good while now. Of course, I'm talking about Jacob Breslow. And it seems to me, Genevieve, obviously Jacob Breslow is the Mermaids trustee who was recently kind of discovered only because of Jolie and Mom, the hilarious King Turf, I call him, because he brought the LGBT Alliance to court, and they released a list of trustees that Mermaids had been keeping secret. Let's start with that, Genevieve. What do you think of that aspect, that they were keeping him secret? Why is there any conceivable reason they could have been keeping him secret beyond trying to cover up what he was about?
Well, I mean, is that actually confirmed? I've seen that been floating around on social media, but I'm not sure it's totally confirmed that that list hadn't been released prior. But if that is the case, then that is very revealing, actually, because it would mean that they must have had some inkling about his history or some of the academic work that he's been doing.
Well, why is it only, if it's not the case that it was a secret, why is all this only coming now? Breslow has turned out to be what I call a one-man WikiLeaks of the gender movement, in that every bit of news that comes up about him is shocking. Why didn't we know about him before?
That's a good question. There have been some feminists who have been sort of tracking his work before in the past. A writer for 4W, Dana, had written about him previously, but he's been kind of on the radar for his work with Before You Act prior to this. But I think maybe not in the UK, or not so much in the UK. But anyway, he was added as a trustee at the end of July. So that could be a possible reason why this didn't come to light sooner. So it's only been a few months, about 3 months, that he was involved that we know of in that capacity.
Yes. A lot of his writing is about, what Barry Wall and yourself have been tracking, which seems to be about the destruction of the idea of the child. Would you say that's a good summation of what his academic writing is about?
Well, yeah, I suppose there's quite a bit. He kind of argues for an end to the carceral state. He talks about sex offender registries and suggests the abolition of sex offender registries. But yeah, in terms of children and childhood, I mean, the title of his 2021 book, Ambivalent Childhoods, there is this kind of idea, and it's not just him, it's these academics within critical childhood theory, I guess is what it's been called, or I've seen it called that now they're coming out to say that childhood is a social construct, which is something that has been predicted. I mean, it's been talked about among those who are gender critical for a while. If you can say that biological sex is a social construct, then clearly you can make that leap over to say that childhood or age is something of a social construct. But he sort of frames it in this, well, he couches it in this very obtuse academic language, obviously, but he's basically saying that, children are not innocent. He's making some of the same arguments that people like organizations like NAMBLA had made, that this is out of protection and care for the child's best interest, that we shouldn't be coddling children, that we should allow them agency and things like this.
Well, yeah, that seems like all of these seem quite convenient for someone who might be a pedophile. And I noticed as well that often we see the argument for transitioning applied to children as young as, I believe 2 children from Ireland were 5 years old who Mermaids dealt with. It seems to me that the aims of pedophiles and the aims of people who support child transition are kind of similar. It's all there's a kind of a pretense. Perhaps it's not a pretense on the past of the gender cultists, but there's a pretense that this is all about children's agency and this will make children more free. How common is that kind of language and that kind of thinking in academia, in queer theory especially?
Well, look, I can point to a contemporary, a colleague of Breslow's named Jules Gill Peterson, who has written a whole book about this. He calls The History of the Transgender Child, but he sort of refers to him, he's a trans-identifying male, but he kind of refers to himself as a childhood abolitionist, and basically is calling for no safeguarding whatsoever in terms of medical treatments, they call it, but I don't see them as treatments, but basically removing all of that. So he's said, and I think very directly, no age of medical consent is necessary, right? So I put that in the article that I wrote because he's very strongly linked with Breslow, and he even spoke at Breslow's book launch last year. So yes, that overlap is there, and it's not anything new either. I mean, we saw this with John Money, right? I mean, the whole kind of queer theory, pedophilia link, the link with sexology and pedophilia that we've talked about before as well. I mean, it's through and through, this, and I do want to make that really clear that this particular case, it's not an outlier. It shouldn't be treated as an outlier. It shouldn't be. We shouldn't continue to keep being surprised by this. There's a problem that's at the very core of this, which is the denial of material reality.
Yeah, I mean, and the kind of obfuscating language seems to be a way of hiding some extremely worrying ideas within their work. Also, the connection, like as you say, it's much bigger than just Jacob Breslow. One of the things that I'm going to I think start talking about a lot because I think it's so important is Amy Challoner's presence at the heart of Stonewall, when Stonewall was spreading these ideas across the UK. Challoner went on to be, if not a paedophile, very much paedophile adjacent. Father was a paedophile. Current lovers are paedophiles. I believe he's living in a menage a trois with two very creepy men who also help moderate Reddit. And it appears to me that Challoner was groomed from childhood. Now, this person then went into Stonewall when Stonewall were arguing for self-ID in places like girl guiding. How come it's not a bigger scandal? For instance, I also understand, doesn't John Money still have a hospital named after him or something? Isn't there a center named after John Money?
A grant. So a grant that's available through the Kinsey Institute. Yes, there is.
How on earth has John Money's name not been completely destroyed after what he did to those kids? Can you kind of sum up? Let's go back a little bit to the kind of genesis of gender identity. Can you just let people know who don't know about John Money what he did, the most shocking thing he did?
Sure. Yeah. And sorry, I'm just speechless because I don't know how it is that he still has this legacy. I mean, he's still widely cited among some of these queer theory scholars. It's shocking. So John Money, most famously, he experimented on children, particularly two boys, one of whom had a botched circumcision. So John Money decided to try to raise the boy as a girl in order to prove his theory that quote unquote gender is socially constructed. And in order to prove this theory, he would have the children act out copulation play, he called it.
But let's remember, this was this boy and his brother, was it?
Yeah.
His twin brother.
Twin brother, yeah.
Yes. Okay.
So David Reimer and his twin brother.
How old were they, Genevieve, at the time?
Well, starting from around 6, I think, is when John Money started to photograph them in mimicking sexual acts together.
6 years old. 6 years old. This is John Money, who still has a grant named after him in America, and is by more or less he is the inventor of gender identity as a concept, isn't he?
Right. Well, him and Robert Stoller, basically, but he came up with the concept of what he called at the time gender schema, which eventually became gender identity, and he would recommend showing pornography to children in order to help them understand their gender schema, which was basically literal sex roles. And I mean sex is in the verb and not in the noun. So he thought, if he wanted to get this little boy to have a female identity, then it would be related to sexual submissiveness. And it's awful to talk about. So maybe that's why people don't really know so much about it. But there was a book in 2000 by John Colapinto, a Canadian journalist, who wrote extensive detail about this. I think just shortly after it was published, David Reimer committed suicide.
Yes, we have here that one brother died of an overdose and David eventually committed suicide. Thank you, Stefan. Yeah, so basically what we have is an entire kind of body of thought and a belief system that is being spread by people like Nicola Sturgeon, and its origin story is the most appalling tale of sexual abuse I think I've ever heard.
Yeah, and John Money pioneered these kind of pedophile treatments. So chemical castration for pedophiles, which basically now today we have the chemical castration being pushed onto children as puberty blockers. So there's, again, we've talked about this before, whatever is going on there, but.
It seems to me as well, I mean, one of the things that came up about Breslow is that he hosted a conference, I think, where his students started talking about holding a knife to TERF's throat. And Breslow himself wrote a paper criticizing Stella O'Malley and J.K. Rowling for the tense they use when they said, I would have been transitioned because I was a tomboy, etc. And it just struck me, like we've seen for about 5 years now, people like Sally Hines, people like Breslow, people like Breslow's student, people, and it's spread not just amongst the gender theorists, but it also has spread outside of those groups to being a kind of a cliche that TERFs, so-called TERFs, are evil and must be stopped and everything is permissible in fighting them. Do you think that this whole hate campaign towards feminists was created almost as another smokescreen, like the obfuscating language, simply to avoid scrutiny, simply to make sure that their ideas weren't contested in the university space by making those spaces as hostile as possible to feminists?
Well, sure. Yeah. It's a way of saying, don't look too deeply at what I'm doing. Look over there at what they're doing, And women have long been the safeguarders and protectors of children. It's not, in my thinking, not a coincidence that they went after lesbians first and then started attacking feminists altogether, because historically it was especially lesbian feminists who were most critical of organizations like NAMBLA and PI, so.
Right. So this was almost like a historic, this was almost tactical because they knew they would be the ones who would put up the most fight.
Well, I certainly feel like it is. I don't have any proof to go on for that, but I feel like it is because once you start to see how organized, organized predators can be, I mean, certainly looking at Breslow, he's spent how many years? 10 years, I think, working on this angle and refining his academic language in order to get his ideas through, in order to influence policies and so on. There's a great deal of determination and organization that goes on behind the scenes. And so when I say that, I feel as if it might be deliberate, this concept of a TERF, I'm basing it on that organizational structure that I've seen.
Yeah. And also, I always find it interesting that Julie Bindel, who was fighting for abused women and children before anyone else and is lesbian, very famous lesbian, has been cancelled longer than any of the rest of us, really. She's been fighting this for 15 years. So that bears out what you were saying about them coming for the lesbians first. You know, I remember even when I turfed out, I was still worried about following Julie Bindel. I thought, oh no, she must have done something terrible, you know, because she was so cancelled. And then I realized, oh right, it's just bullshit like everything else, you know. Let me just go through a few things in your piece that caught my eye recently. One of the things you say is before you act. Now, before you act, that sounds to me like a group that's because of the name, the ostensible reason for it existing is it's trying to say to pedophiles, before you act, think, don't do anything. So is that what, but is this really a cover, would you say? Would you say that this is a legitimate organization?
I mean, it was founded by a convicted pedophile. I mean, and that's in the article. I'm not going to try to pronounce his name, Michael, but he served 3 years in prison for raping a child, you know. And then he also in the Redux article, and this was Anna's digging actually, where she found that he was actually reassuring other self-identified pedophiles that it was a smokescreen. He said so to them. Don't worry, I'm not going to put non-offending in the language.
Right.
And he had sought approval for this project from some former members of NAMBLA.
Yes, yes.
So,
he said, you have here, he had informed other pedophiles that his organization's approach would be focused around garnering public support for normalizing pedophilia by falsely claiming the intention was to prevent child sexual abuse. You know, you can't get clearer than that. The other person who's been brought into all this is a guy called Anderson. What's his first name again? Carl Anderson. Yeah. And Carl Anderson did a magazine called Destroyer that Breslow is very fond of. It says here in your piece, Anderson came under widespread scrutiny in August after it was revealed he had written an academic article in which he admitted to masturbating to fantasy child sexual abuse material for 3 months as part of his research as a PhD student at the University of Manchester. Like, I remember that story, and I remember at the time, I just kind of thought, oh, great, you know, someone's exposing what, you know, here's a brilliant person who can't help himself, and he's just exposed what queer theory is, you know. But now that story is linked to this one, I have a feeling it might start breaking through to a wider audience when they realize that this is a whole field of study that's essentially devoted to masturbation.
Oh yeah. There's things like porn studies now too. That's not, it's not an outlier again. But yeah, so Breslow was a fan of Destroyer magazine. And it's there's pictures of the cover in the article, but you know it's pretty gross stuff, you know, teen boys, themes of, you know, rape, bestiality, etc. And so Breslow, so thank you, by the way, to the woman who there was a Twitter user who dug up Breslow's old blog archives, which is the reason where we have this information from. So I just, you know, want to say thank you to her. But yeah, so because of these old archived links for a blog that he had deleted, a WordPress blog that he started, I think around 2008, I want to say. But in it, he talks about Destroyer magazine. He links through to Destroyer's website, Destroyer being, again, run by Carl Anderson. And then he also linked to some other sites, like porn sites, like one called Milk Boys. You know, so he was linking through to child sexual abuse materials on his blog at the time. And then he also confessed that he had desires based on age, deviant desires based on age, in one of the blog posts that he wrote.
Yes, I saw that. That seems like a hell of an admission, that excerpt. Let me just see if I can find it again. Of course, we have his coming on a shoe business, but yes, it says. He says, and I find this really. Oh yeah, here we go. These are the quotes you're talking about. However, as a marker of infertility, asexuality, and submission, briefs as a sexual object make men's desire sexuality equivalent with the sexuality of a child. I hope to legitimate the re-sexualization of youth in a way that complicates current forms of gender and sexuality. I find the word complicates there very interesting. Isn't this whole movement a way of complicating stuff that's actually quite simple? You know, like if we complicate child safeguarding, that's a problem. If we complicate the age of consent, that's a problem. That seems to me like the end game for a lot of these guys is to complicate these things until pedophiles and people who have, as Breslow says of himself, deviant desires can hide in all the confusion.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, this language just really facilitates predatory behavior because it's so obtuse, and it bullies the audience into respecting whatever's being said because they don't understand it, So there's a sense in which in the language is used to abuse as well, but definitely to cover up some of these intentions. I mean, the average person, if you try to wade through this muck, you're not going to easily be able to see what it's saying, and so I think it is a big con. And he had said that one of his influences in his writing actually is a woman named Judith Levine, who in 2002 wrote a book called the perils of, it was like the perils of preventing sex with minors. Harmful to minors is called.
Harmful to minors.
The perils of preventing childhood sexuality or something like that. But but she wrote that book and was basically arguing to lower the age of consent to 12, which at least a couple of his sources that he cited have made that argument that I've seen so far. But she argued for that. And then one of her main sources for her book was arrested shortly after her book was published. He was a former NAMBLA lawyer named Stanley Lawrence.
Yes.
Anyway, so he was arrested for running, child pornography websites shortly after her book was published, and was a major influence for that book. And then Breslow was saying that book influenced him. So
Breslow also talked in his book about, this is something that I feel you missed a trick on, but maybe you know more, or maybe it's not confirmed or something, but didn't you say in the piece that Breslow describes an event where a 12-year-old was dancing? He actually organized that event, I believe. Did you know that?
I hadn't quite realized that, I guess.
Yeah, no, he organized it. So he's not just talking in admiration about a 12-year-old boy, forcing the audience into some sort of, genius crisis of values. He actually put that on, which I think makes it very, very different suddenly. Let's go into some more of this, some more of your quotes from this. He said, and here's one of those things where I always think, there's a great line in Game of Thrones: everything that comes before the word "but" is bullshit. Although I obviously do not condone abuse, rape, molestation, and intimate partner violence. I love that. I find, most people don't need to say that, don't you find? I find the immediate connection between the sexual desire for youth and its pathologization, internalization, and criminalization to be problematic. I find that's an extraordinary sentence. It's basically saying that even though I don't want to do these things, they should be legal, isn't it?
Yeah, I mean, it again it's trying to separate the act from the desire, which is a common thread in this MAP activism, where they'll say, well, you're criminalizing desire that hasn't been acted upon, as if it's so black and white, as if we're going to start locking people up for their thoughts or something. That seems to be something that they advocate for, not us, but
yeah. But again, it's just kind of confusing the issue, and just enough, isn't it? To like, I also think his use of the phrase, queer child, and the use of the phrase trans child, which I think kind of amounts to the same thing, really, is used to break down those boundaries, aren't they? That kind of subtle changing of the language.
Well, sure. If you can have a trans child, you can certainly have a queer child. I mean, they're pretty much interchangeable, as you said. But yeah, again, it's just the projection of adult ideas and desires onto children that we keep seeing, in order to justify that what they want, their own desires.
Mm, mm. It's interesting. I've just been getting notifications from my friends in Wales who point out as well. I mean, that's the brilliant thing about this, Genevieve. I think Breslow is going to bring everything down. I really do, because I think people are waking up to the fact that you don't need to understand this stuff to know it's wrong, right?
Mm-hmm.
The intention is to confuse you. The intention is to make you doubt yourself. So I think this could be waking the world up. Here's another thing that might shock our UK audience, but Jacob Breslow also cited E.J. Reynolds, who is the main author of Wales's new relationships and sexuality education curriculum. So this is something that the idiots in the Welsh government have just kind of waved through. And we have Breslow praising it, This is queer theory that's coming into Welsh schools, People really have to start arming themselves against this. And people have to start going into their schools and complaining as well, and finding out what the big kids are being taught. And if it's this stuff, stop it,
Mm-hmm.
Sorry, anyway, let me get something else we have. Oh, no, we've done that one. Hold on a sec. Oh, yeah. Like, Breslow also condemned the carceral statement for its treatment of sex offenders and echoed previous work he has done, rejecting the need for the sex offender registry. Now, I'm not Sherlock Holmes, but that seems like something a paedophile would do. Like, if you're actually arguing that there shouldn't be a sex offenders registry, I mean, could that be any clearer what's going on here?
Right. And again, just like we keep seeing, he piggybacked off of the actual persecution of the lesbian and gay community. How homosexuality was once considered a crime and pathologized, and you could be put in prison. And then that's the justification for saying, we should just get rid of the whole system.
Yeah.
Again, we keep seeing that, over and over, that pattern of taking the actual problems that the gay community had to deal with, and then using it to usher in these
Yes.
pedophilia, fetishes, and so on.
It's interesting because Section 28 keeps being brought up as a specter by trans rights activists. They always say, oh, this is just like Section 28, But I only found out this week that Section 28, I found out from Barry Wall, the Section 28 was introduced because of the rise of PIE, the Paedophile Information Exchange in the UK. So it's funny that they're using a response to the previous scandal where pedophiles started getting their foot in the door to try and grease the wheels of this one.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and they've already started calling this a moral panic.
Yes.
Or that we're blowing it out of proportion. I think J.K. Rowling had tweeted about that, how people were saying that this is just a one-off. Oh, well, just one pedophile in a children's charity. That's no big deal, right?
Yeah.
Well, in reality, the whole thing is constructed by pedophile apologists, John Money, Alfred Kinsey, and so on. It's not just the one, of course, like we said, but the kind of things that can get excused. I mean, it's extraordinary, isn't it? That something like this could happen, and then people could actually say, well, it's only one.
Yeah, but it's not just the one. It's the kind of coarsening of the way we think about children. That, I mean, yesterday people might have thought it was because it didn't really have anything to do with queer theory, but I saw that video of the daycare teacher terrorizing children. Luckily, I believe that the people responsible have been fired. But it occurred to me that only in a world where childhood innocence has been successfully chipped away at by these men who have just found themselves have wriggled their way into every organization, it seems. And even when they haven't, the theories have kind of wriggled their way into every organization. Only in that world could such a thing be possible. Only in that world could a teacher not realize that terrorizing toddlers is wrong. Do you know what I mean? It feels to me like queer theorists, have already been partially successful in destroying the idea of the child. But anyway, sorry, I don't want to get too down about this, because in the end, here's another thing. In the end, this is a good story because it's being exposed. But I'd like to talk a little bit about Breslow's brother. What's the story there? His brother is an assistant professor with dual affiliation at Albert Einstein College of Medicine and Harvard Medical School, who advocates for the medical transitioning of children and has expressed support for his brother's views on minor attraction. Harvard Medical School. Holy shit.
Yeah, he's a licensed therapist, I believe. He does the LGBT therapy. But to be honest, I haven't looked too deeply into him yet because of doing this piece first. So I wouldn't really want to comment too much on that, except just to say that he has expressed support in the past when Jacob Breslow published Ambivalent Childhoods, and has spoken on panels with him as well. So
well, I guess the thing that interests me about that is the fact that he's at Harvard Medical. The fact that he's at these two institutions. One of the things that I've been finding out a lot about recently is the capture of medical schools, especially in the US, where students are literally criticizing people when they say that someone is a male or a female. They actually will say AMAB, who identifies as male, all this sort of kind of circuitous language to talk about, medical patients. That seems to me like a red flag as well. And it seems to me that one place that queer theory needs to be kept far away from is medicine. But we've already seen the terrible results of that, Sorry, there's not really a question there. I don't really. So listen, so what is your opinion on this? You've been reporting on this. I mean, we should also mention that Genevieve's reporting also includes another story that should be worldwide news and for some reason isn't, which is what you found out about the eunuch archives. Can you just give us a little recap of what your investigation into that exposed?
Yeah, so I basically found that the World Professional Association for Transgender Health had been partnering for over a decade with a fetish forum that was eroticizing the chemical castration of children. And I published two articles about that in May for Redux, and we were able to name at least 3 academics who were behind the fetish website, who had been speaking at WPATH conferences and had been invited to work on the standards of care. So September, the new standards of care draft documents were finalized, and in them it included the identity of eunuch, which was directly sourced from this eunuch fetish castration website that hosted thousands of stories depicting the sexual abuse and genital mutilation of children.
And WPATH is the group that is seen as the world leader in so-called trans healthcare. Isn't that right?
That's right. Yes, and
they've also brought down the age. What did they do there? Can you explain to people what they did there?
So initially, in their draft document that was published in December, so it wasn't the finalized standards of care, but they had been recommending the age of 14 for certain medical interventions, including things like puberty blockers. And then I think surgery was 17. So it would have been brought down a year from the previous standards of care. Mm-hmm. But suddenly at the last minute, before they finalized the document, or actually, no, this was a revision that was made after the document was finalized, I believe. They turned around and said they did away with all age restrictions altogether and implemented a very subjective term, which is called Tanner Stage 2, which is a term for adolescent development, and it can be anywhere between like 9 years old to 11 years old. So basically, they're giving the doctors subjective criteria for them to make their own decisions. And then interestingly, someone leaked a video of their symposium that took place last month, where one of the doctors openly said that the reason they had done this was because they wanted to prevent doctors from being sued, because they were already ignoring the guidance that had been previously published. So they did it in an attempt to prevent lawsuits, actually.
Wow. And they did it, and to do something, to make such an extreme change after the report has been published, it almost seems random, you know? I mean, it's like, what kind of standards of care are they? You know?
To make a decision like that, and well, I mean, yeah, well, first of all, the new standards of care were delayed repeatedly, so there was something going on behind the scenes there. But yeah, it would seem to suggest that perhaps the doctors were communicating with WPATH and saying, "Hey, if you do this, I can get in trouble," because, you know, I'm speculating, but that seems to be what happened. And then, you know, they're covering themselves in the case of lawsuits, which we're now starting to see, thankfully. The outrage coming forward about the transitioning of children, finally. I think Vanderbilt University or Vanderbilt Hospital so recently just said they would be
Yes, they
stopping.
paused them. Yes.
Right.
Which is
So
great.
it's great. Yeah, we need much more of this. And so I see this anger, this mounting challenge to the harm being done to children, and it's wonderful. It's great.
Well, maybe that's a good place to leave it. I think we've covered Breslow in depth. It's not over though. I'll soon be speaking to people about the connections between Breslow and the London School of Economics, which I think is the next scandal coming up. Kerry Black has done some great work. Was actually the person who contacted Breslow after which he immediately deactivated his Twitter account. So I'll hopefully be speaking to her. But in the meantime, you know, as always, Genevieve, thank you for all your work. Redux is absolutely essential viewing, of reading, and you know, just keep it up, and please come back anytime you want.
There's just one last thing I want to say
Yeah.
before, well, a couple of things, which is that when I've been looking at some of the pedophile forums in the recent days, they've been talking about the Breslow case, and one person had said that the TERFs are a bigger threat to their community than the trans community is, which I thought was sorry, I laugh. It's very serious, actually, but you
One
know,
would hope. One would hope that
yeah.
you know, yeah. And what was the other thing?
The other thing is just I just wanted to say thank you to you and to all of the people online who have been working really hard to dig up information about not only Breslow but about all of these connections. You know, I think it's really wonderful to see the community and the organizing and the way that we're starting to see finally some results of you know what's been years of hard work for a lot of people. So.
Yeah, no, it feels like we're really turning a corner, and a lot of that is down to you. Thank you so much, Genevieve, and I will see you again soon, hopefully. Stick around. I'll just say goodbye properly when I get rid of the hoi polloi. Thanks everyone for watching, and we'll see you all soon. You're not really hoi polloi. I love you guys. Thank you for watching. I haven't really been looking at the comments, but I'll catch up with them afterwards. And yeah, look out for more stuff. We're going to keep speaking to people who are breaking this scandal wide open. Kerry Black soon, hopefully. All right, bye-bye.